The power features of scenarios, sensitivities and templates are all controlled from the variants menu in STEM. However, in STEM 7.4, the actual menu labels were slightly imprecise or even arguably ambiguous. So for STEM 7.5 we have taken the opportunity to revise them as indicated here on the slide. So you'll see that whereas it used to say create scenarios, it now says add a scenario parameter. So the thing is, the first time you ever did this, it's true, you were creating scenarios, but actually what was happening really was, because there was no dimension and no variance, it would create them for you, but then actually more specifically what it was doing in context was it was making the current field a parameter for that new dimension. And when you would come back to add something else, you weren't really creating scenarios. You could sort of say you were, but more specifically what you were doing is you're adding something else as a scenario parameter. And particularly if you were working with template replication, then it was better to be saying adding a template parameter rather than saying create replicas, because you definitely weren't creating replicas each time. You typically already had your replicas, and now what you were doing is you're saying I want this to be a parameter for the template, so that within the replicas you already have, this would allow you to specify some different values. So create scenarios, add a scenario parameter. It's in grey so you can't see it so clearly here. I'll show you one that's in the software in a minute. Whereas it used to just say remove, it now more specifically says remove as parameter, because it doesn't mean take away the scenario, it simply means take away this particular parameter from that scenario. Where it used to just say update and apply, which is always hideously ambiguous, it now specifically says update variant data, which means it would take the value from the working model and update a variant which you would pick. And conversely, the one which said apply now explicitly says apply to original. It would mean it would prompt you for a variant to apply to the working model. So whereas the old menu items were nice and short and concise, the truth is that it wasn't clear even to me, let alone anyone else, exactly what they meant, and hopefully the new terminology will achieve that aim more convincingly. Same principle applies to the template ones and to the sensitivity ones, and as I say, create replicas was always the one that I groaned about most when I was doing training, because you've already got your template, you've typically got your template and you said I want it to be this structure for 5 sites, and so you've already created the replicas, and then your next stop is, well, I'd like to make something vary, and it just felt all wrong to say create replicas when actually you'd already got them, and what you were really doing was adding something as a parameter for the template. So hopefully that gives you an insight into why we've changed them. As I say, in a minute I'll show you how it looks in the software. The other thing which goes hand in hand with this is that in STEM 7.4, when something was identified as a scenario parameter or a template parameter or a sensitivity parameter for that matter, the text in the dialog would be shown in purple. So over here you'd go from being a formula here for 2, 1 plus 1 is 2, formula shown in red, to, well, actually it looks very similar on the screen, but actually that's in purple. The idea was that the purple would indicate where the volatile scenario values were, and the trouble is that, as I'm just kind of illustrating, not only would that colour not necessarily be that different to what was there before, it would also then mask the previous distinction between a grey for an unset value, or a black for a set value, or a red for a formula, or a green or a blue for links from Excel. And so for both of those reasons it was not ideal to be using purple text here. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to shade the background of the cell in a nice bright pink colour. It's actually the same hue as the scenario links we use against the views, but it's a bit brighter, and the idea is to I'm sorry, not the scenario links, it's the same hue as the colour block you get around the variants, and it's slightly darker because the grey of the dialogue is slightly darker than the white of the screen, and the idea is that will then A, be more noticeable, and B, not get in the way of telling whether it's a value or a formula, i.e. whether it's grey or black. So those are the two changes, and the best thing is for me to just show you a practical example. So if I switch over to the editor, here it is. This is the model we were looking at earlier to do with transition and decommissioning. So here I have a dialogue where you can see straight away, without looking at all hard, you can see straight away there are two parameters in there which are sensitivity, which are scenario parameters, and the text is still black and it would still be red if it was a formula, so that's much better. And if I pull down the menu, and I'm going to be more specific, if I select this field which is not currently a parameter, I pull down the menu, then you'll see here is the new terminology. So it's giving me the option to add this field as a scenario parameter, or to view the variant data, that one's the same, but then explicitly saying to remove this as a parameter, or to update the variant data, or to apply to the original. Of course, those are great because this one is not yet a parameter. If I selected one that was already a parameter, then the menu would be slightly different. It would be saying this one would be grayed, all the other ones would be enabled, which by the way is how you can tell if it's a scenario parameter as opposed to any other kind of parameter. And so you can see that it will now explicitly say you have the option to remove it as a parameter. You have the option to update the variant data, and you can see the dots here, which weren't shown in the slide, indicate that if you do this, it means update a variant data which you would pick with the value here in the working model, and conversely, then the apply one is now explicit. It means apply to the original model, again from a choice of variant, so it would be go and pick a variant and apply the value for one of these to the value you see here. And going back to the one that isn't anything, finally, it no longer says create replicas, it says add as a template parameter, which is so much better than it was before, because create replicas really wasn't a good thing for it to say. So that's what it looks like statically, and if you go and add something as a parameter, so if I go back to this one and say I'd like to make this, let's say a sensitivity parameter, then as soon as I do it, then as well as creating the sensitivity and all the stuff it usually does, you'll see that straight away this field is now also shaded in pink, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's really blatant, instantly visible, and a much better contrast for highlighting the critical scenario or any other parameters in a model.